Most people spend their entire lives trying to make more money, without ever realizing the real problem is the way they think. Not the amount they earn, not the opportunities they have, not the economy they were born into, the way they think. And I don't mean that as a motivational line. I mean it as a structural observation about why some people build real wealth and most people don't. Because I've watched this up close for a long time. I've watched people with every apparent advantage struggle to hold on to money, and I've watched people with almost nothing build something extraordinary. And the difference, every single time, comes back to thinking. Specific patterns of thinking. Specific ways of seeing risk and time and value in other people. That produce completely different decisions. And completely different lives. By the end of this, I want you to understand exactly what those patterns are. Not in theory. Not in abstract motivational language. In the specific practical way that actually changes how you make decisions. Because that's the only level at which any of this actually matters. Let me start with the most fundamental pattern. The one that underlies everything else. Most people think about money as the destination. Wealthy people think about money as the result. And I know that sounds like a subtle distinction. It isn't. When money is the destination, every decision you make runs through one question. How do I get more money right now? And that question produces a very specific kind of behavior, safe behavior, predictable behavior. Behavior optimized for the next paycheck, the next raise, the next incremental step forward on a path someone else designed. It produces people who are very good at capturing value that already exists, getting a piece of something that's already been built, but not very good at creating new value, building something that didn't exist before. And here's the problem with only capturing value. There's a ceiling, a hard one, because you're always competing with everyone else trying to capture the same existing value for the same jobs, the same salaries, the same promotions, the same predictable outcomes. Wealthy people aren't competing for those things because they're not asking that question. They're asking something completely different. What problem can I solve that isn't being solved? What does the world need that doesn't fully exist yet? What can I build that creates value for a large number of people? And money follows those answers. Consistently, reliably, not immediately, but consistently. Because the market rewards value creation more than value capture. Always has. Always will. The question is which game you're playing. And most people were never told there were two games. Here's the second pattern. And this one is the one that creates the most visible difference in behavior. Most people make decisions to avoid loss. Wealthy people make decisions to maximize upside. Those two orientations produce completely different choices in almost every situation. When you're oriented toward avoiding loss, every decision starts with what could go wrong. What's the downside here? What do I risk losing? What happens if this doesn't work? And those questions aren't wrong. They're important questions. But when they dominate the decision-making process, when they get more weight than the upside, you end up systematically underinvesting in opportunities. You pass on things that would have worked. You wait too long before moving. You need more certainty than the situation will ever provide. And you end up with a life that is very safe and very limited. Wealthy people run the calculation differently. They still ask what could go wrong, but they ask it alongside a different question. What is the actual worst case here? Can I survive it? And if I can survive the worst case, what happens if this works? That asymmetry. Survivable downside against significant upside is the fundamental calculation behind almost every wealth-building decision. And it produces the willingness to move on incomplete information, to start before you're certain, to take shots that might not land. Because in a world that rewards early movers, the willingness to act before the consensus catches up is worth an enormous amount. The person waiting for certainty is always acting on information that everyone else already has, which means they're always arriving after the opportunity has already been taken. Let me talk about time, because the way wealthy people experience time is genuinely different from how most people experience it, and this difference produces more visible outcomes than almost anything else. Most people make decisions on short time horizons. They're optimizing for this month. Maybe this year, and that's understandable. Bills are due this month. Results are evaluated this quarter. The pressure to show something is constant and immediate. But that short horizon produces short horizon decisions. The investment that costs something now, but pays off in 3 years gets passed over. The skill that requires 18 months of uncomfortable learning before it becomes useful gets abandoned. The relationship that requires patience and consistency and showing up without immediate return gets deprioritized, all because the time horizon is too short to see the payoff. Wealthy people think in longer frames, not because they're more patient by nature, But because they've internalized something specific about how value compounds, they understand that almost nothing significant happens quickly, that the things worth building take years, that skills compound, that relationships compound, that reputation compounds, that good decisions made consistently over long periods don't just add up, they multiply. And when you understand that at a deep level, your daily decisions change. Because you're not just asking, what does this produce today? You're asking, what does this become in 5 years if I keep doing it? And that question points toward completely different choices. Now let me talk about something that most conversations about wealth avoid. The self-image problem. Most people have a self-image that was formed early. By parents who had their own limitations. By schools that rewarded certain things and punished others. By early experiences that told them something about what kind of person they were, and what kind of outcomes they could expect. And for most people, that self-image has ceilings built into it, not explicit beliefs, not conscious thoughts that say you can't do this, but quiet underlying assumptions about what kind of person builds something like that, about what level of intelligence or background or connection is required, about whether someone from where you come from, with the history you have, gets to have outcomes like that. These assumptions don't show up as thoughts, they show up as behaviors. As the point at which you stop pushing, as the opportunities you don't pursue because something tells you they aren't for you, as the rooms you don't walk into, as the version of success you're willing to aim for, which is almost always just slightly beyond where you currently are, rather than something genuinely ambitious. Wealthy people have either been given a self-image without those ceilings, or they've done the specific work of identifying and dismantling them, not through affirmations, not through pretending to believe things they don't actually believe, through accumulating real evidence, through doing hard things and surviving them, through building a track record that makes the old assumptions look false. Because here's what's true about the ceilings in your self-image. They are hypotheses, not facts. And hypotheses can be tested. And when you test them and they fail, when you do the thing your self-image said you couldn't do, the hypothesis gets updated. The ceiling rises, and then you can see further, and aim further, and build further, one piece of real evidence at a time. Here's the pattern that I think is most underestimated. The relationship with other people. Most people go through the world primarily concerned with how they're coming across. Am I saying the right things? Do these people like me? Am I fitting in? Am I being judged? And that inward focus, that constant self-monitoring, has a real cost. It consumes enormous mental energy. It makes you reactive instead of observant. It puts other people's opinions at the center of your decision-making. And it makes you a genuinely poor reader of what's actually happening around you. Because you cannot observe accurately when you're performing. You cannot understand a room when most of your attention is pointed inward. Wealthy people have developed the ability to shift that attention, to get genuinely curious about the people around them. What do they actually want? What problems do they have that aren't being solved? What do they value that nobody else is addressing? What do they need that they can't fully articulate? And that genuine outward curiosity is one of the most practically valuable things a person can develop. Because everything worth building is built for people. Every product, every company, every service, every institution. And the person who actually understands people, who can read what they need rather than just what they say, who can see the gap between what exists and what people actually want, that person has an advantage that almost nothing else can replace. Let me talk about failure. Because this is where the thinking difference shows up most clearly in day-to-day behavior. When something goes wrong, most people look outward. The circumstances were against them. The timing was bad. The other people involved let them down. The market moved. Something external is responsible, and that outward explanation feels better in the short term. It protects the self-image. It gives you something to be angry at. It keeps the story simple. But it produces nothing useful. Because if the problem is always external, you never have to change. And if you never change, you keep producing the same patterns, with different circumstances and different people, but the same fundamental outcomes. Wealthy people do something different when things go wrong. They look inward, not in a self-punishing way, in a genuinely curious way. What is it about the decisions I made? What did I choose not to see that I should have seen? What pattern in my own behavior contributed to this? What would I do differently if I could go back? And then, what does that tell me about what I need to change going forward? That process, honest self-examination after failure, is where the most valuable learning lies. Because failure contains specific information about your actual patterns, your actual blind spots, your actual tendencies under pressure, information that success never gives you. And the people who develop a genuine relationship with that information, who can look at their failures directly without flinching away, are the people who keep getting better in a way that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. The real reason wealthy people think differently is not that they were born with different minds. It's that somewhere along the way, they made specific updates to how they think. From money as destination to money as result, from avoiding loss to maximizing asymmetric upside, from short time horizons to long ones, from a self-image with ceilings to one without them, from inward focus to genuine outward curiosity, from blame to honest self-examination. None of these are personality traits you either have or don't. They're thinking patterns that can be learned, that have been learned, by people who started with every disadvantage you can imagine, and made these specific updates, one at a time, over years, through real experience, through real failure, through honest reflection on why certain patterns kept producing the same outcomes, and through the decision to change those patterns, even when changing them was uncomfortable, even when the old way felt safer, even when nobody around them understood what they were doing. Most people spend their entire lives trying to make more money, without ever realizing the real problem is the way they think. Now you know what that means. The only question left is what you're going to do about it. Not tomorrow, not when the timing is better, not when you have more information. Now, with the next decision you make, because that decision is either reinforcing the old patterns or building new ones. And the direction you choose in this moment is the direction your life moves. It has always worked exactly that way, and it always will.